Let's dive into one of the most chilling chapters of modern history, the rise of Nazism and Adolf Hitler. This isn't just some old story from a textbook. It's about how an entire nation could get swept away by a truly dangerous idea. We're going to try and figure out how on earth it all happened.
Our story starts, believe it or not, through the eyes of an 11-year-old boy. His name was Helmuth, and it's the spring of 1945 in Germany. He's lying in bed and overhears his parents talking about something absolutely terrifying. His father, who's a doctor, is asking his mother if they should kill the whole family or if he should just kill himself.
The very next day, Helmut's father went to his office and took his own life. And that leaves us with this huge, haunting question that's going to drive our whole explainer today. What could possibly make a man, a doctor, so desperate? To get that answer, we have to understand the world he was living in. So here's our game plan. First, we'll dig into that father's fear. Then we'll zoom out and look at the crisis gripping the entire nation of Germany. We'll break down the promises Hitler made that sounded so good to so many people, see how democracy itself was destroyed, and finally, unpack the dark worldview at the heart of Nazism. Okay, so why was he so scared? Well, the reason is pretty simple and pretty chilling. Helmut's father was a Nazi, a dedicated one. By May 1945, Germany had lost the war and surrendered. He knew the world was about to find out about all the horrific things his side had done, and he was terrified of revenge. And you know what? He had every reason to be scared. The winning countries, the Allies, set up something called the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg. This was a huge deal. For the first time ever, world leaders were going to be put on trial for crimes against humanity. For guys like Helmut's father, the party was over, and a day of reckoning was coming. But how did a whole country get to this point? I mean, really, how? The story of the Nazis' rise actually starts in the rubble of World War I. Germany's brand new democracy, called the Weimar Republic, was basically born into an impossible situation. The country was in a total crisis. Politically, the government was super weak, and it kept having to use this emergency power, Article 48, just to get things done, which made people lose faith in democracy. Economically, it was a disaster. They had to pay these massive war reparations, which led to something called hyperinflation. We're talking people needing wheelbarrows full of cash just to buy a loaf of bread. Your entire life savings could become worthless overnight. All this chaos just destroyed people's confidence and pushed them to look for extreme answers. And right into this mess, this perfect storm of desperation and anger, steps Adolf Hitler. He was a veteran of World War I, and he was furious. He perfectly captured the rage and humiliation millions of Germans were feeling. He took over a tiny political group and turned it into the Nazi Party. But here's the crazy part. At first, nobody was buying it. I mean, nobody. In the 1928 election, the Nazis got a measly 2.6% of the vote. They were a joke, a tiny fringe group. But then the Great Depression hit the world, and it absolutely crushed Germany. Banks failed, people lost their jobs, and in that desperation, they started listening to Hitler. The result was a political earthquake. By 1932, the Nazi vote just exploded, all the way to 37%. Just like that, they were the biggest political party in the country. So how did he do it? By making promises that were like music to the ears of a broken nation. He said, "I'll build a strong Germany. I'll rip up that humiliating Versailles Treaty. I'll give you back your dignity." He promised jobs to everyone who needed one. And he gave them someone to blame, promising to get rid of all foreign influences. On January 30th, 1933, it happened. Hitler was made chancellor, the most powerful job in the government. And once he had that power, he didn't waste a single second. He immediately began to tear down the entire democratic system, piece by piece. The speed of this is just staggering. In January, he becomes chancellor. 1 month later, there's a suspicious fire in the parliament building, and boom, he uses it as an excuse to suspend basic rights, like freedom of speech. By March, he passes the Enabling Act, which basically let him make any law he wanted. It made him a dictator. And a few months later, all other political parties were banned. It was over. Democracy in Germany was dead. So now he's got total power. But what did Hitler and the Nazis actually believe? What was the idea driving all of this? This wasn't just about controlling people. It was about forcing a very specific and very twisted vision on the entire world. At the very core of all Nazi thinking was this simple but horrifying idea, a racial hierarchy. They believed that not all people were equal. Simple as that. In their minds, some people were just biologically better, and others were biologically worse. This one belief was the foundation for everything else they did. At the tippy top of this pyramid were the desirables, who they called the pure Nordic German Aryans. They were the master race. And at the very bottom were the undesirables. This group included Jews, gypsies, people with disabilities, basically anyone they considered impure or abnormal. And in their view, these people didn't even have a right to exist. The other huge piece of the puzzle was this idea of Lebensraum. It just means living space. Hitler believed the German master race needed more room to grow, so they had to go out and conquer new lands, especially in Eastern Europe. This idea was their excuse for invading their neighbors and starting World War II. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here, right? We've gone from one man's personal fear all the way to a global war. So now let's take a second to pause. It's your turn to think. Let's lock in the most important points from all of this. First up, can you lay out the problems the Weimar Republic was facing? Think about that perfect storm we talked about, the weak politics, the economic disaster, and how it made everyone lose hope. All right, next question. Why did Nazism suddenly get so popular by 1930? Try to connect the dots between the failures of the Weimar Republic and the promises Hitler was making. How did one lead to the other? And what about the Nazi ideology itself? What were those two core, really strange ideas that we just talked about? You know, the ones about a racial hierarchy and the need for more living space? And finally, how exactly did the Nazis establish total control? Think about that quick step-by-step process of killing democracy, using things like that scary Enabling Act that gave them all the power. Answering that really brings the whole story full circle. You know, understanding how this happened is so important so we can make sure it never happens again. If you found this explainer helpful for breaking all this down, please do us a favor and like, share, and subscribe. And definitely don't forget to hit that bell icon so you won't miss our next one.